as Joe already mentioned, we are talking about sex for the rest of February and actually the first week in March. If you're curious about upcoming topics, they're actually in your bulletin in the bottom section where it says Spotlight. Next week we are going to be talking about sex in the context of marriage. So the question for next week is going to be, how can I get the most out of sex in my marriage? I was looking at that this morning thinking, wow, that's kind of an audacious sermon topic. But I think it's important for us to start out by addressing it in a celebratory manner in the context that it was designed for. And so we're gonna start there next week, and we're gonna do our best to tackle that question from a biblical standpoint. And then we're gonna start out this week our question. We're calling the whole month Straight Talk About Sex. How should followers of Jesus approach the topic of sex? So this is just going to be kind of an overview question. How should we be thinking about this topic in general? And then we're going to start out actually this morning with a short video clip, which Amy's going to pull up for us. I actually love this skit, particularly because it reminds me so much of the conversations that I've had with my own kids as they have grown up. My all-time favorite conversation about sex with my kids is actually with our middle child, Josh. And just in case you're wondering, I did ask him if it was okay for me to tell this story. He's always been the child in our family that has lots and lots of questions. And when he was little, actually, we used to sometimes email our friends to tell them the latest funny questions that he had asked because he had so many great questions. But so this one time he was about 5 years old, and he asked me some questions about how babies get made, and I told him sort of the same things that I had said before. There's a little piece of mommy and a little piece of daddy, and God brings them together, and you could tell right away that he had realized that he had heard this part of the story before, and he says to me, "Yes, Mommy, I know, but how does the sperm get in there?" And I realized, kind of like the woman doing the skit up here, that I needed to give a little bit of a more in-depth answer at that point. So we had more of a conversation. I just wanted to start out with this video basically because I thought we should just start by admitting that sometimes talking about sex makes us uncomfortable. And parents often get nervous about what to say when their kids have questions, and sometimes it just makes us nervous. It's an interesting topic because it fascinates most of us too. It's something that people are sort of just incredibly curious about, even from a young age. Children tend to, be pretty puzzled about it. It seems kind of weird when you explain it to them, and so they kind of come back to it like, what? I don't really get it. Let's try to figure this out. Even little babies are very interested in their sexuality. If you've ever been a parent or even regularly babysat, very small children, they will find their genitals, and they want to touch themselves there because it feels good when you touch yourself there. It's different than the rest of their bodies, and they're curious about it. And there's nothing wrong with that, but it definitely has a tendency to make adults really uncomfortable. So adults are always kind of like, oh, how do I make them stop doing that? This is so awkward. But it's not them, it's us, right? It's the adults that are uncomfortable with this interest in their genitals in children. But it's something that often makes us uncomfortable. It embarrasses us, and it's something that we often have really strong emotions about, especially if we've been hurt in that area in some way. And it is kind of weird. I mean, if you really think about it, the woman in this skit that we were watching goes on a little bit later to say, after she's mentioned genitalia and stuff like that to her daughter, and her daughter kind of says, "You mean where you go to the bathroom? That's where humans make babies? Where you go to the bathroom? Gross." So her daughter, when you think about it, it is kind of weird. I mean, it's a bit strange, and sometimes it makes us laugh. In addition to a lot of other things, sex is kind of funny, and it's okay if we think it's kind of funny, and it's okay for us to laugh about that. And so I want to just start off this morning and start off really kind of this whole month with let's all take a deep breath. So everybody take a deep breath. It's going to be okay. I'm telling that to myself because I'm the one standing up here talking about it. But okay, Okay, so first of all, what attitude should we take toward sex as followers of Jesus? And I want to start off, and this kind of goes along with what I was just saying about it's okay if it's funny, it's okay if it's uncomfortable, it's okay if it's emotional. First of all, try not to over-spiritualize or under-spiritualize sex. And what I mean by that is, let's try not to make it into anything that it's not. A totally non-sexual, hypothetical example of over-spiritualization. We at Coast Vineyard, one thing we really value is hearing from the Lord. We like to have a sense that God is directing our lives, and we spend time intentionally listening to God and hoping that He will speak to us because we want to have direction for where we're going and what we're doing in life. And that makes more sense in some contexts than other contexts. For instance, when I'm getting ready in the evening to cook dinner for my family, I don't get down on my knees and pray, "Dear God, please show me what to fix for dinner. Should I make broccoli or asparagus?" And I don't wait on the Lord to see if God will speak to me about my dinner, right? I just make dinner. I don't over-spiritualize it. I don't try to turn an evening's meal into something that it's not. And I think sometimes we do that with sex. We try to make it into something that's just much bigger, much more ethereal, much more spiritual than it really is. I did this a lot when I first got married. I was a brand new Christian when I first got married. I was just starting to follow Jesus, and I really wanted to have good sex. Now, a note is, I didn't mean good sex in terms of like, I wanted our sex to be lots of fun. What I mean by good sex, I wanted it to be like really holy sex. I wanted us to have godly, good sex, not, bad, yucky sex. And I figured, I had been single and not a Christian and living my life how I was living it, and I had plenty of bad sex. I had had uncomfortably awkward sex that makes you feel embarrassed later and guilty later and just kind of felt yucky, and I didn't want to have yucky bad sex now that I was married and following Jesus. I wanted to have, deep intimacy with my husband. I wanted our lovemaking to be this beautiful thing where we would feel deeply connected with one another on a personal level and a spiritual level, where our hearts would connect and it was going to be this gorgeous, ethereal thing, and God's presence would be with us during the whole time, and I would feel so wonderful and holy, and I was so disappointed and confused. Not because romantic sex isn't fantastic, not because you can't have a really deep sense of connection, not because God shouldn't be present with you in your bedroom, but because I was trying to make it into something that it wasn't, right? I was expecting, sex is not prayer. Sex is not a date. It's sex, and it's kind of sexy. And so how you're going to feel like while you're having sex is, sort of more sexy than like other stuff. So it took me a while eventually to realize that, all of those sort of like hot, steamy, excited feelings that I thought were really dirty, like that's sex. That's what it feels like, and it's okay. It's good. It's supposed to be like that. So that was kind of a big shocker for me. So maybe I'm a little bit of a slow learner. But realizing like, this is actually what it's about. It's supposed to feel like that, and those feelings aren't bad. Those feelings are actually good. So don't over-spiritualize it. Let's not try to turn it into something that it isn't. Let's let it be what it actually is. We want to come at sex with a basically down-to-earth approach, just like we would come at anything else. And it's part of our physical created existence. When we read the Genesis account of creation in the very beginning, the Bible tells us that God made human beings, male and female. It tells us that right after we read that God made all of the animals, male and female. So this is something that we share with animals. Everybody's doing it. I was going to say that, if you just observe nature, everybody's doing it, and I realize that we're city people, so we don't observe nature, and we don't see that everybody is doing it. But if we lived around animals, we would see that everybody is doing it. This is part of our physical created being that we share with the rest of creation. And so let's let it be a part of our physical being. At one point, somebody asked Jesus a question about marriage and remarriage, and what's going to happen in heaven if somebody's married and then her husband dies and she marries somebody else, and her husband dies and she marries somebody else. Who's she going to be married to when she gets to heaven? And Jesus says, oh, it's not going to be like that in heaven. People aren't going to marry and be given in marriage. It's going to be different. So my take on that is it seems that this is something we don't take with us. This isn't sort of part of our eternal spiritual being, but it's a part of our physical existence here on this earth. The second side of that, though, is let's not under-spiritualize sex. Let's not just turn it into something which is purely physical and doesn't matter and isn't important and doesn't have a spiritual aspect. When God creates human sexuality, he says something that's really different from what he says about all of the other animals that he creates. When he makes human beings male and female, he says that the man's going to leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two are going to become one flesh. And this marks us apart. This makes us different from the animals that were created. It means there's some sort of deep spiritual bond that happens to the man and the woman as they become united, as they become one. And so there is a spiritual element to our sexuality. And really, a biblical worldview doesn't try to pull the things apart. A biblical worldview would say that really all of life is spiritual, and that we can be our whole selves all the time in every situation that we're in. So as we kind of look at this topic, let's try not to make it more than it is, and let's try not to make it less than it is, but let's let it be itself in the way it was created. We're going to take a look at what the Bible says about sex, and I'm going to just pray over us as we do that. Lord, I just want to thank you that you have created us sexual beings. Thank you for the bodies that you made us. God, I ask that you would help us not to be embarrassed or ashamed about them. That you would help us not to be confused about them. But Lord, that we would just enter into everything that you have made us to be with joy and with thanksgiving. Let me just pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen. So the main thing I want to say about what the Bible actually says about human sexuality is that the Bible actively promotes and celebrates sex. The biblical take on sex is continually positive. God made it from the very beginning, and he likes it. And he's declared it's good, and you see a really positive view of human sexuality throughout all of the scriptures. As a matter of fact, there is an entire book of the Bible that is devoted entirely to love, and specifically to erotic love. And that's Song of Songs. If you haven't read it, you should go home and read it. The images are pretty different from modern images of sex, so it reads a little strangely. You read it and you think, well, that's kind of weird, but it's because it's a different culture and a different time, and the metaphors that are used are really different. But one thing that becomes really obvious as we pay attention to it is that this is really just a wide open celebration of human sexuality. A short quote from Song of Songs. The woman in the poem says, "Let my beloved come into his garden and taste its choice fruits." She's talking about her physical body. It's an invitation to her lover to enter in and to receive the blessings of her body. It's a beautiful invitation to a lover, and the whole song reads very much like this. It's a lot of agricultural images, but if we can get past the weirdness of agricultural images that don't make sense to us in our context, really what this is about, they describe each other's bodies in great detail, and they talk about their desire. So really it's a celebration of human bodies, and really, again, just raw physical desire. And it's kind of strange to realize that actually exists in our scriptures. I'm going to read you a couple just longer sections of it, just so we can get a feel for what is really being said. This first one is the man's description of the woman. He says, "How beautiful your sandaled feet, O prince's daughter. Your graceful legs are like jewels, the work of an artist's hands. Your navel is a rounded goblet that never lacks blended wine. Your waist is a mound of wheat encircled by lilies. Your breasts are like two fawns, like twin fawns of a gazelle. Your neck is like an ivory tower. Your eyes are the pools of Heshbon by the gate of Bath Rabbim. Your nose is like the tower of Lebanon, looking toward Damascus. Your head crowns you like Mount Carmel. Your hair is like royal tapestry. The king is held captive by its tresses. How beautiful you are, and how pleasing, my love, with your delights." This part will sound a little bit more like a modern connection. Some images have kind of stood the test of time. He says, "Your stature is like that of the palm, and your breasts like clusters of fruit. I said, I will climb the palm tree. I will take hold of its fruit. May your breasts be like clusters of grapes on the vine, the fragrance of your breath like apples, and your mouth like the best wine." And the woman replies to him, "May the wine go straight to my beloved, flowing gently over lips and teeth. I belong to my beloved, and his desires for me." So we've got this, again, he's describing her, really, her body in detail from head to toe. And as she says, it's about desire. And then the woman says this of the man. She's speaking to her friends. She says, "Daughters of Jerusalem, I charge you, if you find my beloved, what will you tell him? Tell him I am faint with love." And they answer her, "How is your beloved better than others, most beautiful of women? How is your beloved better than others, that you so charge us?" And here's her description of him. "My beloved is radiant and ruddy, outstanding among 10,000. His head is purest gold. His hair is wavy and black as a raven. His eyes are like doves by the water stream, washed in milk, mounted like jewels. His cheeks are like the beds of spice, yielding perfume. His lips are like lilies dripping with myrrh. His arms are like rods of gold set with topaz." A side note is, as she describes the man's body, we see more images of like metals or stones, and I think it makes sense. There were some really soft images for the woman's body, and as she talks about the man's body, you see something that's described as being maybe stronger or more muscular. His body is like polished ivory, decorated with something I can't read, lapis lazuli. His legs are pillars of marble set on bases of pure gold. His appearance is like Lebanon, choice as its cedars. His mouth is sweetness itself. He is altogether lovely. This is my beloved. This is my friend, daughters of Jerusalem. So again, she describes his physical being just from head to toe, and describes it as something that she desires, that she wants to touch, that she wants to be close to. And of course, she also mentions that this is the one that she loves, the one that is her friend. And so again, this is just a wide open celebration of human sexuality. This is so good and so beautiful. So the Bible actively promotes and celebrates sex, and so we should approach sex with confidence and with thanksgiving. And that means, for instance, when our kids do ask us questions about where do babies come from and how does this work, it does tend to make us feel uncomfortable. And yet it's so important for us to try not to manifest all of that discomfort, but to be able to speak about it with confidence, to not blush and mumble words of genitalia under our breath because it makes us so nervous, but to be able to say to our children, hey, this is a beautiful and a wonderful thing that God has made for us, and I would love to talk with you about it. And then being able to be thankful. We should be able to pray in all sincerity without feeling uncomfortable or embarrassed. God, thank you so much for my body. Thank you that you have made me a sexual person. Thank you for my sexuality. Thank you that when you created human beings, you created men and women. You created them of all different sizes. You created them of all different ethnicities. You created them in every shape and size, and they are all beautifully and wonderfully made. Thank you so much for every part of that. So if this is true, if this is God's perspective on human sexuality, then why is it that we're so embarrassed about it all the time? Why does it make people just so uncomfortable and so nervous to talk about it? In the beginning of creation, it says in Genesis, the man and his wife were both naked and they felt no shame. They were just standing there in front of each other, completely bare, and they felt great about themselves. They weren't ashamed of their bodies. They weren't ashamed of their sexuality. They weren't nervous around each other. And then something changed. When the fall happened, when human beings chose to disobey God, something changed. And we're not going to get into sort of like exactly what year did this happen, and did Eve have a literal conversation with a snake? That's not the point. But the point is that when human beings went away from obedience to God and started doing things their own way, one of the first things that was attacked was their sexuality. Even before the curse is pronounced over them, the first thing they do is they notice that they're naked and they cover themselves up. And when God goes looking for them, Adam says to God, I was afraid because I was naked, so I hid. And so all of a sudden there's this fear around bodies. And that's something which has just continued down from the beginning through generation and generation. It's a huge part of our culture that, not that God thinks that sex is vulgar, but that we have somehow just distorted God's good gift in our mind, and our culture makes sex look dirty and vulgar. One of the things that stands out to me when I think about this is, our cuss words. Why is it that when we really want to insult somebody, we call them a sexual organ? Like, that makes no sense. When you think about it, why would you call someone a sex organ if you wanted to insult them? I mean, it's odd. If we had the kind of respect for our sexuality that God does, like, that would be a compliment, but it's not. It's an insult. That's weird. And why do we say things in our culture, why do we say things when we want to really insult somebody that implies that we want to, have some sort of sexual activity with them? That's just weird. I was asking myself this morning, when was it in your life that you first started to feel ashamed of your sexuality? And I realized, it was when I went to school and I heard swearing. And I heard kids insulting one another and putting one another down and jockeying for position. And I experienced bullying, and I got called nasty things which were sexual, and it made me feel ashamed. And as I heard those things, I thought, gosh, what is this saying about me as a person? But one more thought just on the words that our culture uses for insults. And I'm not gonna list out a whole bunch of swear words for you to analyze the way that I read the long passage of Song of Songs. I'll let you do that in your own imagination. And those of you who have less dirty minds, you might have to do that in your own imagination later at home. But think about the words that people use and the language that people use to insult one another. There's something in here, and I will say, maybe I'll give one example, which is, I would say, think in particular about how we talk about oral sex when we want to be insulting. Somehow or other, the way that we use sexual language makes it sound like there is something incredibly horrible and degrading about being on the receiving end of a penis. Think about that. And if it takes a while to think about it later. What does that say about how we think about women? What does that say about how we think about men? What does that say about how we think about our sexuality and our relationships with one another? It's broken, right? I remember as a child kind of hearing these things and hearing the things that people would say to each other and things that people would say to me and thinking, wow, sex is really dirty and gross. I have those body parts. I must be really dirty and gross. And then I'm thinking, I'm also really curious about sex. I kind of want to know what that looks like, and I'm interested in sexuality. So if this is really dirty and gross and I'm interested in it, then there must be something terribly wrong with me. And so what are we doing to ourselves and to our culture and the way that the attitude that we have about sex? One of the things that still actually makes me really uncomfortable, I often have a hard time watching comedy movies. And it's because so often in comedy movies, sex is portrayed as this kind of like really just kind of gross, uncomfortable thing. And we started out in the very beginning saying, hey, sometimes sex is funny, we should be able to laugh about it and that should be okay. But there's a difference between saying, oh, hey, sometimes sex is funny and we can laugh and that's fine, and saying we're going to turn our perspective on sexuality into something that's really kind of degrading and gross, and we're going to ridicule that aspect of our lives. That's really different. And so again, this is stuff that comes from human brokenness. It's not stuff that comes from God. And I think so often this ends up being turned around in the minds of the culture, as if somehow it's God that's uncomfortable with sex. Somehow it's here in church, in the body of God, that we are uptight about our sexuality, and somehow like the world is okay with it. But it's completely the other way around. God is the one who loves and celebrates sexuality, and it's human culture that's kind of turned the whole thing on its head. God's completely pro-sex. What God's not into is the misuse of our sexuality, the degradation of our sexuality, the way that we treat one another, the way we talk about it. That's not what God's into. God's not into these perspectives on human sexuality that bring shame. So another thing that the Bible teaches us about sex is it teaches us to treasure and to protect our sexuality. Even in the Song of Songs that I just read those passages from, there's this wide open celebration of the human body. And there's this image that we talked about of the woman's body as a garden that she's inviting her lover to come into. At the same time, the man describes her body as being like a garden that is locked up, a private garden, that he's the only one who gets to go into and to enjoy. He also talks about her as being an enclosed spring. It's like a secret spring. It's a private place that's just between him and her, and no one else comes into that space with them. And the woman in that song also says over and over again, not to awaken love before the right time. But this is something which needs to wait until the right time and the right place. It's something which is to be treasured and to be shared privately. That one flesh bond that we talked about, it's described in Genesis, is meant to be a bond between one man and one woman for a lifetime. I want to read a section from Proverbs chapter 5. This is actually exhortation to a man for being faithful to his wife throughout his lifetime. And it says this: drink water from your own cistern, running water from your own well. Should your springs overflow in the streets, your streams of water in the public squares? Let them be yours alone, never to be shared with strangers. May your fountain be blessed, and may you rejoice in the wife of your youth, a loving doe, a graceful deer. May her breasts satisfy you always. May you ever be intoxicated by her love. I love this because it's got a lot of the same just really beautiful images as the song that we read earlier. You've got this image of love as an intoxicating thing, and of intimacy between the man and the woman. And it's kind of racy. Again, it's different images than what we're used to, but it's kind of amazing to realize that the Bible actually contains a passage where a blessing is pronounced on the man's fountain. So you can kind of take that however you want to take that. But this is in our scriptures. It's, may your body parts and stuff be blessed. It's in there. And yet there's an admonition in there, right? You should never have this out in public. Don't ever share this part of your body with a woman that you don't know. You would never want to take something which is so great a treasure and share it with a woman who's not committed to loving you, to loving every part of you for the rest of your lives together. But stay committed to The wife of your youth, that doesn't mean a young woman, that actually means an old woman. That's the woman that you married when you were young, if you got married young. That you married whenever you married her, and it's staying faithful to that woman throughout a lifetime. Again, private, for one person only. And so the Bible teaches us again to treasure and protect our sexuality, and so we should approach sex with respect, and we should approach it with care. You know, how do you treat something that you really deeply treasure? If you really treasure something, how do you treat it? When I was young, my mom gave me something which was a treasure to her. She gave me a doll that had been hers when she was a little girl, and she'd actually saved it throughout her life so that she could give it to me. And I had a lot of dolls. And I had this one doll that was special. It had been my mom's. And you could tell it was different because it was made out of a harder kind of a plastic, and it had a mechanism inside where if you moved her arms, her legs would move too, so you could make it look like she was walking. If you held her hand and you moved it back and forth, she would walk. And I loved this doll. I was also a little child, and when I was 4 years old, I got a haircut. And after I got a haircut, I thought, hey, I think my dolls should all get haircuts too. So I turned my playroom into a beauty salon, and I lined all my dolls up, and I got some scissors, and I started to give all my dolls haircuts. And when my mom walked into the room, I had chopped all the hair off of every single doll except for the special doll, the antique doll. She was last in line. I had lined them up smallest to biggest, and she was the biggest one. So she was next. I was about to take the scissors to my mom's antique doll when she walked into the room. It's like, stop! No, it's not acceptable to give the dolls haircuts. And it's definitely not acceptable to give this doll a haircut. No haircuts for the special doll. Oh, okay. No problem, no more haircuts. So, 2 years later, I'm maybe 6 years old, and I'm playing some imaginary game, and I've got the special doll, and you can only change their clothes so many different times, and then you got to do other things. So I had this sort of great imaginary game going on where there was some sort of like huge epic battle and conflicts and kidnappings and crazy things going on, and I don't really remember what the whole storyline was. All I remember is that at one point she was jettisoned off the front porch, and I threw her from the front porch onto the driveway because she was a part of this sort of like, violent story that was going on. So the doll was jettisoned off the front porch onto the driveway and acquired like a big scratch down the front of her face, and my mom comes screaming out of the house like, stop! What are you doing? And after that, my mom decided that I did not have the wisdom and maturity to be in possession of something that she treasured that much, and so the special doll was removed from my room and lived on a shelf in my mom's closet for the remainder of my childhood. Now, fortunately or unfortunately, depending on how you want to look at it, our genitals are sort of attached to us, so God's not going to be able to just take them away and put them on a shelf in his closet if we misuse them. But really, how do we treat something which is a treasure to us? If we care about something a lot, we don't throw it off the front porch. I was 6 and I didn't know better. But you don't throw something off the front porch into the driveway that you treasure. You don't leave something sitting out on your front lawn that you treasure. You don't share it out publicly, but you protect it and you care for it. And this is how God speaks to us in the Bible, that we should take care of our sexuality, that it's a treasure which we protect and care for. And we're just going to close this message with thinking about just a little check-in. We have a personal check-in. What's our attitude toward our own sexuality? How are we thinking about sex? How are we thinking about our bodies? How are we thinking about this in our own lives? I think often the world around us likes to think that it is feeling confident and celebratory about sex, when what it's really doing is degrading sexuality and devaluing it. So often in our culture, it's, hey, we should just be able to have our stars, should just be able to stand out there in public and do anything they want with our bodies. And, that's seen as a good thing because it's sexual confidence, right? But no, that's not sexual confidence, right? That's just lack of value for something which is a treasure. It's degrading something which is meant to be valued. And so we don't want to participate in that aspect of culture. And at the same time, I think the flip side tends to happen. We've been told that we should protect and care for our sexuality. And yet, I think often what we end up doing instead is we're hiding it out of shame. And there's a difference between hiding your sexuality because you feel ashamed of it and protecting and caring for your sexuality because you love it and you delight in it and you're grateful for it. And so I just want to take a moment for us just to ask ourselves, what's the attitude I'm taking in my heart toward my body and my sexuality? And to invite God just to speak to us, his heart. Actually, let's just stand and we'll pray together. Lord, I just want to thank you once again for how you have made us. Thank you that it's not your heart that we should feel ashamed of our sexuality or ashamed of our bodies. And God, just wherever the wrong messages have crept into our hearts and we felt shame and we've hid out of that shame, God, I ask that you would free us from that. And Lord, wherever just this culture of devaluing and degrading sexuality has crept into our hearts, God, we also ask that you would free us from that. And God, that you would just put us into a position to celebrate our sexuality in a way that is valuing of what it is that you have created and made. God, would you help us to be whole people? Would you enable us to be everything that we are, all together? Our spiritual selves, our sexual selves, our professional selves. God, would you make us whole people in every way? And we're going to worship together now. We're just going to sing the Lord as we do every Sunday. And just as we do that, let's be grateful to him for how he's made us. And again, also just ask that question of ourselves. Hey, how am I treating myself as a sexual being? And give ourselves back to him.
Any people from the prayer team up here to the front? We're going to do ministry time slightly different today. Just going to ask that everybody stay where you're at until the very end of all the ministry calls before you come up. And the reason for that is just so that we as a prayer team are available for you guys to pray for you for anything, not just what was spoken on today or what... it doesn't have to be about today's topic, but we're here to pray for you guys today. And just in the spirit of anima and being anonymous, we're just going to ask that you guys wait till the very end and just come up as you feel that. Just you can just tell the person that you are getting prayer from what exactly you want prayer for, and we'll do that. So with that, we got a few pictures earlier this morning as we were praying for the service, and one of the things that we felt like God was highlighting were people that feel a sense of shame or that are suppressing their struggles with sexuality or just any sort of struggle they might be having relating with that topic in any way. People that may be in services, arms raised in worship and everything, but that they know to be kind of a front, that they're hiding the fact that they're hurting inside. And if that's you, we would definitely love to pray for you today. It's a day we feel like God really wants to show his just his desire to wash us clean. And when Jesus came for us and he died, his blood was sufficient for everything. Got a picture of a woman on her wedding day. She was in her wedding dress, and when she looked down at her dress, it was covered in just dirty stains, and felt like the Lord wanted to clean that person, so that when they looked at themselves, they were clean. So if any of those mean something to you, please come up, and we'd love to pray for you. There are a few more female people on our prayer team that wouldn't be able to come up with me. That'd also probably be nice. Last thing was, felt like if you were in an area where you were struggling with some sort of sexual shame, wanted to speak over you guys just as I'm talking right now, that you're forgiven, and that Jesus' blood washes you clean. And if you today want to make a commitment to, I guess as Michelle was talking, like treasure your sexuality, to value, to protect it, today can be a day where you come up and we just agree with you in your decision to do that. So if that's something you guys also want to do, please come up. And in Coast tradition, we're gonna close the service by holding hands across the aisle. It's just a symbol of us being united as a church family. And I'll pray for us to close. So Lord, we thank you for your blood. We thank you for your sacrifice on the cross. And Lord, thank you that your blood washes us clean. That no matter how dirty we get, or how dirty we can see ourselves, or how much shame and guilt we feel, that your love surpasses all of those things, that it washes us clean. We thank you, Lord, today that your grace is sufficient for us. We ask for more of that. We just bless every person here to leave this place feeling refreshed, new, clean, and ultimately loved by you. So we bless every person here to be the full person they were created to be. We pray all these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
One thing that was just mentioned is that we may have some couples here who would like to receive prayer together, and if that's you, I just want to invite you. If you were kind of thinking that you might want to do that, then this may be God prompting you to do that. And actually, I think